Okay, so get this right. We're gonna dive into a case today, and it's got this kind of crazy outcome where someone's found liable by a jury, but the damages awarded are surprisingly small. So how does that even happen? Well, that's what we're gonna untangle today with you guessed it, the case of Conor McGregor, and we've got excerpts from this. Really fascinating article. It's called The Case of Conor McGregor, a detailed examination of allegations, trial, and verdict.
Yeah, and what I think is super interesting about this case is it really shows how different criminal and civil cases are, especially when it comes to that whole idea of burden of proof. It gets really complicated.
Yeah, for sure. So, just a quick recap, I guess, for anyone who might not be totally up on McGregor. You know, he's a giant in the world of mixed martial arts, a real superstar. But we're not here to talk about his fights or anything like that. What we're really diving into is the allegations against him, the trial that followed, and what's really fascinating to me is the implications of that mixed verdict.
Totally. And just to make sure we're all starting from the same place, it's important to remember that this was a civil trial, not a criminal one. And there's some key differences there, especially in how they each approach that whole burden of proof thing.
Okay, so that means that if this had gone to criminal court, it would have been like a completely different situation, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's back up a bit. It all starts back in December of 2018. According to the article, we've got a Dublin resident, Nikita Han. She's at her workplace Christmas party. And afterwards, she and a friend allegedly meet up with Conor McGregor, who offers them a ride to a penthouse party at the Beacon Hotel.
And this is where Hand alleges the assault occurred. Her claim is that McGregor invited her to a private room, and that's where it happened. She says she repeatedly said no and tried to resist, but that she was ultimately overpowered.
Wow. So that's obviously a very serious allegation, and it led to an investigation by the Garda Euro. But here's where things get really interesting. The Irish prosecutors decided not to pursue criminal charges.
Yeah, and that decision really comes down to a key legal concept, that burden of proof that we were talking about in criminal cases. To bring criminal charges, prosecutors need to be absolutely certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that they can convince a jury that the defendant is guilty. It's a really, really high bar to clear.
Oh, wow. I see. So in this case, even with the investigation, they just didn't feel that they had that really solid evidence to meet that beyond a reasonable doubt standard.
Exactly. And that's one of the main reasons why a case might not go to criminal trial, even if there are allegations.
Right. So it's really about being able to prove it to that really high standard.
Yeah.
So does that mean case closed then?
Not so fast.
Oh, really?
Nope, not at all. And this is where the difference between criminal and civil law really comes into play. Even though there weren't criminal charges, Hand was still able to bring a civil claim against McGregor.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And so she did. Fast forward to late 2024, and the civil trial begins. And I'm sure you can just imagine, like, the media frenzy around all this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But hold on. So the standard of proof in a civil case, that's different too, right? Can you break that down a little bit?
Absolutely. Think about it like this. In a criminal case, you need to be almost 100% certain. Like, you need an umbrella when you see it's pouring rain outside.
Right.
But in a civil case, it's more like deciding if you need an umbrella when there's a chance of rain. It's about the balance of probabilities. Is it more likely than not that something happened? It's a lower burden of proof than that, beyond a reasonable doubt, which makes sense since each type of trial has different goals.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to think about it. So we've got this civil trial going on, and the opening statements, they really kind of set the stage for a real clash of perspectives here. Hand's legal team, they focus on her consistent account of what happened that night, the trauma that she says she endured, and all of the evidence that they believe supports her side of the story.
And McGregor's defense, they come out swinging, vehemently denying everything, saying that the encounter was totally consensual. They even try to portray Hand as someone who's just out for money. So right from the start, you've got these two totally opposite stories.
Yeah, and it's interesting because then, of course, we get to the testimonies themselves. And according to the article, Nikita Hand gives this really emotional testimony. She describes the events in detail and talks about the lasting impact that they've had on her life.
While McGregor, in his testimony, maintains his innocence throughout. He states that everything that happened was consensual, which really makes you think, how do they even start to figure out which account to believe?
Yeah, it's really like The classic he said, she said situation, right? Like, how do you possibly determine what actually happened?
Right.
But there was more to it than just, their words, right? Didn't both sides bring in a whole bunch of other evidence to try and back up their versions of
Oh,
events?
yeah, they did. We're talking DNA evidence,
Hmm.
medical records, witness statements,
Yeah.
text messages, everything.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is that the defense actually challenged the timeline of events, suggesting there were inconsistencies in Hand's account as a way to try and make her seem less reliable. It was like a total legal tug of war, with each side trying to pull the jury in their direction.
So after weeks of all this, like back and forth, the jury finally came back with their decision, and it was a mixed verdict.
A mixed verdict. That's where things get extra interesting. It means that the jury reached different conclusions on the different claims being made. In this case, they found McGregor liable for sexually assaulting Hand, but then awarded her €250,000 in damages.
Wait, so hold on, I'm a little confused here. They believed Hand enough to hold McGregor responsible, but then didn't give her the full amount of damages that she was asking for. That seems, well, mixed.
It is. It's not your typical outcome.
Well-
And that's what makes this whole case so fascinating. It seems like the jury really struggled with all the evidence. They didn't just pick a side. They landed somewhere in the middle, acknowledging that there was harm, but maybe also considering some of the defense's arguments as well.
Wow, so this is getting really complex. I'm really curious to hear more about how everyone reacted to this and what it means for both Hand and McGregor. But I think we're going to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
It's a verdict that really left people wondering what to think, and Hand and McGregor's reactions, well, they were pretty much as different as you might expect.
Okay, so let's start with Nikita Hand.
Yeah.
How does she respond to this unusual mixed verdict?
So Hand issued a public statement expressing, relief and gratitude for the support she'd received through this really tough ordeal. I mean, it couldn't have been easy for her to come forward at all, especially in such a high-profile case like this. She also talked about how important it is for survivors to speak out, no matter how hard it may seem. It was a pretty powerful message, I think, about resilience, considering everything she'd been through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, speaking out against someone as famous as Conor McGregor, that takes serious courage.
Mhm.
So, flipping the coin, what was McGregor's reaction?
Well, McGregor, through his legal team, maintained his innocence, and right away announced his intention to appeal the decision. They basically came out and criticized the verdict
Yeah.
and made it clear they weren't going to just accept it.
So a mixed verdict leads to mixed reactions. I guess that's not that surprising, given how polarizing this whole case has been. I imagine public opinion is pretty divided on this, right?
Absolutely. This case really touches on some of those big conversations happening in society right now about sexual assault, about celebrity culture, and how the legal system handles these really sensitive situations. You've got people who see the verdict as a win for survivors, proof that even really powerful figures can be held accountable. And then you've got those who question if the trial was even fair, maybe because they're influenced by McGregor's fame, or just because they were skeptical of the allegations in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, there are always multiple perspectives and there are always strong emotions tied to these cases. It's rarely a black and white situation, and getting everyone to agree on anything can be nearly impossible. But, stepping back a bit, going beyond just Hand and McGregor, this case also highlights some bigger kind of systemic issues, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the biggest takeaways here, I think, is just how hard it can be to prove sexual assault cases, no matter who's involved. We already talked about that really high burden of proof in criminal cases, which makes getting a conviction incredibly difficult.
Right, and even in civil cases, where the standard is a bit lower, like we were talking about with that balance of probabilities thing, there are still, serious obstacles to overcome.
Exactly. It's important to remember that these cases often rely heavily on the memories and the interpretations of the people involved. We're dealing with events that might have happened years ago, and that just makes things more complicated because memories can be unclear, and there's always room for different ways of seeing what happened.
Yeah, it's a good point. These cases are rarely cut and dry. It's not always easy to figure out exactly what happened. And even with its best efforts, sometimes the legal system has a tough time navigating those gray areas.
Definitely. And there's another thing I think is worth mentioning, the whole issue of anonymity in civil cases. Unlike criminal cases where, the accuser and the defendant often have automatic anonymity. Those protections are guaranteed in Irish civil cases.
Oh, wow. So that means that both Hand and McGregor had their names and the details of this whole case just all over the media.
Exactly. And that difference is huge. It makes you wonder about, what impact it might have on everyone. Could it discourage other people from coming forward with allegations because they don't want to be in the public eye? They don't want to risk their reputation. And on the other hand, it could mean someone faces really intense public judgment before they even have a chance to defend themselves in court.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like, how do we balance the right to a fair trial with the right to privacy? It's a hard question, and this case really brings that question front and center.
Absolutely. It definitely raises questions about fairness and how to protect everyone's rights while still making sure that the legal process is transparent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, Conor McGregor's celebrity status. It's just impossible to ignore how his fame and wealth might have played into all of this.
It's true. You can't just separate the person from their public image. I mean, McGregor is a worldwide icon.
Yeah.
And that kind of fame brings with it a whole different set of dynamics. So how do you think that celebrity factor might have influenced things, both, in terms of how the public sees it and maybe even within the legal proceedings themselves?
Well, it's clear that celebrity adds another layer of complexity to any legal case. You've got the constant media attention, the opinions that fans and critics already have, and the potential for financial and social influence. All of that can impact how a case unfolds, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly.
Yeah, and we've seen that so many times before, haven't we, with these high-profile cases. It often becomes more about what the public thinks and what's trending online than about what's actually happening in the courtroom. And that raises some serious concerns about whether everyone involved is really getting a fair shot, regardless of how famous they are or how much money they have.
Yeah, it's crucial. We like to think justice is blind, but the truth is that those outside factors, like fame or money, can sometimes influence things.
Yeah.
And it's something we all need to be aware of as a society and try to prevent.
Yeah, I totally agree. So where does that leave us? I mean, we've got this mixed verdict. We've got a public that's totally divided and all these complex issues surrounding the case. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
I think we have, and there's still so many questions to think about. Like on an individual level, we have to wait and see what happens next for Hand and McGregor. McGregor's planning to appeal, so this legal battle isn't over yet. It'll be interesting to see how the appeals process goes and if the original verdict is upheld or not.
Right. And beyond just the legal side of things, there's also the human element to all of this. I mean, both Hand and McGregor have been through a lot. And no matter what side you're on, it's clear that this case has taken a toll on everyone involved.
Absolutely. And on a broader societal level, I think this case forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about how we as a society handle these sexual assault allegations.
Yeah.
It makes us think about how hard it can be to prove these cases, the role of anonymity, the influence of power and fame, and the fact that the playing field in our legal systems often isn't level.
It's a good reminder that while this case might be coming to an end, the bigger conversation about sexual assault, about justice, and about accountability, that conversation is far from over.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think about, how we as a society deal with these really tough issues.
It really does. There are just so many questions this case brings up. Like, are legal systems even, ready to handle these kinds of sensitive and complicated situations?
Are we doing enough to help survivors?
Yeah.
And make sure they're really being heard?
It's a lot.
And how do we find that balance
Yeah.
between holding people accountable and making sure everyone gets treated fairly and that the legal process is followed? It's a constant, back and forth.
Yeah, and like you said before, these aren't just like, ideas we talk about in a classroom, right? These are real concepts that have real world effects on real people.
Exactly.
And I think this case really, really shows that.
It does.
So this deep dive into the Conor McGregor case has been, it's been really eye-opening, I think. I mean, it's shown us just how complicated these sexual assault allegations can be and all the nuances of the legal system and these bigger societal implications that we just can't ignore.
It really has. And it's a case that's going to keep people talking and debating for a while, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a conversation that we all need to be a part of. So to our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this. How does this case, with all its twists and turns, how does it change how you think about these issues? How do you think celebrity culture and these different standards of proof in legal cases, how do they affect how we see these situations? It's messy. There aren't any easy answers, but it's a conversation worth having. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive of